Hi everyone. Before you dive into the episode, I just wanted to interrupt really quickly. You're gonna dive into this episode and you're gonna hear me call this podcast the Holistic Hustle Podcast. And that is because it used to be the old name of this podcast. And it was an amazing ride. I'm so grateful for the Holistic Hustle Podcast and what it served. But recently I've decided to rebrand the podcast based off the evolution of my own journey, my own story, and where God is calling me to go next. And so now the rebrand, which you may know already, is called Wisdom is Wealth. Didn't want you to be confused, so dive into this episode. They were an amazing episode, amazing guests, amazing insights, and enjoy.
One thing that I hear a lot in the intuitive eating space is you need to give yourself permission to eat all foods unconditionally, which I agree with. You need to give yourself permission to eat whatever you want. And sometimes you even need to give yourself permission to binge.
Hi, I'm Justin Buonamo, and this is Holistic Hustle. Holistic Hustle is doing things for the right reasons, working hard for the right reasons. The healthy balance of what work and progression and accomplishment and success should actually look like. Welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Hustle Podcast. I have my friend and amazing client here, Alex Long, who is a multi-dimensional human being, which I agree with, and registered dietitian who is passionate about helping women heal their relationship with food and their bodies so that they can step into their new identity as the healthiest, happiest version of themselves and live the vibrant and fulfilling life that they were always meant to live. She has worked her whole life trying to be the thinnest, fittest, smartest person, which only spiraled into an eating disorder, PCOS, and an autoimmune disease. Now, after recovering from her eating disorder, she is using the power of food and somatic healing to regulate her cycle, heal her gut, and show people that it is safe to be their loudest, most authentic self, and that we are not meant to fit into a box that society wants us to fit in. Amen. We are meant to grow, change, and evolve, and so are our bodies. She hopes to show women that we are more than our bodies. What we look like is not the most interesting thing about us, and we do not have to shrink ourselves or quiet down in order to be seen, heard, and loved. She hopes to show women that coming back home to ourselves, reconnecting with our body and our intuition through food and in life can help us all collectively heal from diet culture and from the chronic ailments we've been struggling with for years. And so Alex is a gift to this earth. I met her a couple of months ago. She shortly afterwards became a client of my company, JFF. And, I met her for the first time actually in person back in August. And she is literally the type of person that she doesn't have to say anything, but she's not just going to light up the room, but your life as having her a part of it. And just when I heard what she did, I was like, there couldn't be more of a perfect person that does this, because you need to carry that radiant energy and that light about you to be able to guide women on such a crucial, but also touchy topic. Right. And it's kind of like finances, the fitness and the nutrition industry. There's just so much out there, and the majority of it is BS. Right. But Alex is not just a gift to that industry, but to this world in totality. And I know she's going to be a gift to the audience today. So, Alex, thank you so much for being here today. I can't wait to dive in.
Thank you so much for that wonderful intro, Justin. That was like the best compliment that anyone's ever given me. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely. And I mean it. And I know that the crowd is going to understand, or the audience is going to understand exactly what I mean, after we dive in here. And so, reading your bio, which I appreciate the vulnerability and the transparency in it. And I know it allows the audience to really just see what you've been through and the depth that you have. And so through your journey, I know that you've been able to discover what motivated you. I'd be curious, have you been able to discover what motivated you to work so hard to be the thinnest, fittest, and smartest person? And why was that such a large priority for you as you've kind of went through this healing journey?
Yeah, that's a really, really big question, and
Take your time with it.
a really hard question, honestly. And I think that I've only recently discovered the answer, because up until now, I thought that, I should say up until maybe this year, I thought that that's what you were meant to do, right? I've always been a really growth-minded individual. And I thought that in order to be successful in this life, you needed to learn how to climb the corporate ladder, make the most money possible. You needed to learn how to be the thinnest, most fit person, especially as somebody who used to be an athlete and then wanted to go into the nutrition and fitness industry. I thought that I had to lead by example. I thought that I needed to, do really well in school, get the best grades to get into the best, college education program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized that it wasn't necessarily just, society making me feel that way, because I think to a degree that is sort of what we're all taught as we're growing up. What was really making me feel that way was that I just didn't have a lot of love for myself. And I realized from a very, very young age that I got a lot of praise and affirmation and recognition when I did those things. And I wasn't giving myself that validation, affirmation, recognition. So I was seeking it from all of these other people in my life. And I just thought that that was the only way I was going to receive the love that I wasn't giving myself. And
Oof.
so I had this like huge epiphany moment. Honestly, it was probably what, it's 2024, almost 2025 at the time of recording this, which is crazy. It was probably 2021. I had this moment. I remember sitting in my bedroom back in Denver, Colorado, and my life was really good on paper. Like I had the physique, I had the dream job. I became the registered dietitian. I was helping women heal their relationship with food. I had the husband, I had the dog. Like we were living in a high rise in Denver. Like everything was fantastic. But
Mm.
I still was really unhappy and really unfulfilled. And I had this wake up call like, is this it? Is this what my life is? Did I achieve all that I wanted to achieve? Why do I still feel this way deep down? And that's when I started my own personal healing journey.
Mm. I don't know if I've ever been able to relate to somebody's story more than yours as a guest here because it just hit home when you were saying basically all of those things, the being the thinnest, the fittest, the smartest, right? It's just us trying to gain love and acceptance from other people through accolades, accomplishments, and achievements. And once we see that we get praise for it and validation from those things, it becomes addicting. And it's like, well, if I'm not the thinnest anymore, people are still going to praise me, and I kind of see that in my own life a lot of times. Like one that I can think of, I used to love when people would say that I'm the hardest worker they've ever met. Right. And so I just would make up bullshit to work hard on just to
Yeah.
get that praise, and it took me a long time to kind of like heal from that. And like, I still get anxious just, laying on the couch some days. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to get that praise. It's like, who cares? Like, who cares? And so I appreciate you sharing that. And the other part is just, I've been in that spot before in my life too, as well, where like everything on paper looked fantastic, right? It was like the dream life on paper, but I'm like, something's off, right? Something's off. And it's usually what something that's going on internal, right? And I always say, when I was 30 years old, God put me in a paradoxical corner. For some reason, He decided to give me everything I wanted, right, in life that I thought was going to make me happy, and I was just as depressed and as anxious as I was before, And so, what was left? It was to go internally, And so, I think a lot of times until we do that we develop habits, right, or what society may call disorders or addictions, right, that help us cope with whatever's going on inside until we actually figure it out. And again, I appreciate the transparency and the vulnerability around the eating disorder, and I think a lot of people struggle with that but don't want to say anything about it, don't know where to go for help, and then ultimately just get stuck when it comes from yeah, maybe they may overcome it, but like the after effect of overcoming it, I think is also tough. I've got a friend in my head that I'm thinking about that, like, she's overcome it, but like, and doesn't have it anymore, but like a lot still lingers. And so I'd be curious, what's a popular piece of advice when it comes to healing from an eating disorder that like you don't agree with?
Ooh, I, before I answer that question, I just wanted to reflect back something that you said. I really believe that our inner world reflects our outer world.
Yeah.
And especially it's even more nuanced and kind of complicated when it as it relates to eating disorders because, you were saying how both of us lived this life, you know, we lived this life by other people. Like, what am I trying to say? Maybe we can edit this part out.
Nah, we're leaving it. Authentic, baby.
Yeah, keeping it. I'm like really struggling to find my words. I felt like I was living a life defined by other people, and I was living a life defined by my own achievements. I was defining my own worth by my achievements. And I, specifically as it relates to my eating disorder and my relationship with food, I was so miserable in my own body, in my own self, in my own environment. I didn't know how else to cope other than making myself as small as possible, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. I just wanted to shrink myself. I felt like the entire world around me was so beyond my control. I didn't know what else to do other than just retreat, retreat, retreat. And I felt like, especially in the early years, my eating disorder was just a manifestation of one, again, my lack of coping mechanisms, and two, my lack of real self-worth. Again, I was living by society's unrealistic beauty standards, right? And whether it's the eating disorder or whatever the behavior is, it really can be addicting. I remember my first therapist, she previously was a specialist for alcohol and drug addiction. She worked in that kind of like rehab facility, and she talked to me about the parallels between, what she was working with in AA and now what she does in helping women overcome overcome eating disorders or heal from eating disorders. And it was just really interesting because I did feel like I got addicted to the behavior and to the praise that I received when I was a size double zero.
Mhm.
People didn't realize how much I was hurting on the inside. People didn't realize that I was so sick, but I was getting so many compliments because I was super thin. I was losing weight. Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Like, you look so good in those low-rise jeans. Like, it kind of sickening when you think about it. And my eating disorder has taken many forms. And it's
Okay.
even really interesting now because I could kind of talk to you about my whole journey. In the very beginning, I was very anorexic. Again, I was starving myself. I was skipping lunch. I was throwing food away in secret. Eventually, my body burned out from that and I started full on binge eating, like pendulum swing. I gained 50 pounds in a really short amount of time, and I was eating in secret. I was using again that food to cope just in a little bit of a different way. Then I started quote unquote purging via exercise. I would be working out 2, 3 hours a day, and it was just this vicious cycle. I would starve myself during the day, go to the gym for 2, 3 hours, and then just full on binge at night. And even as I started going to therapy, getting help, and learning about nutrition, again, I was in school to become a dietitian at the time, that I was still binging in college as just this like, I didn't have any other coping tool to help me with my anxiety, the stress of school, the stress of relationships. I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know how rooted in childhood trauma it was, right? So then I had to go through this whole period of recovering from the binging. And even now, if I'm not doing the work to address what's actually going on, again, emotionally, spiritually, if I'm not moving the trauma out of my body, out of my nervous system, I'm seeing my old addictive patterns show up in like compulsive spending, for example, right? It's the same but different behavior, if that makes sense.
Repackaged. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just repackaged. And with eating disorders specifically, just because this is the field that I work in, I do see this huge push for intuitive eating, which I am all for and I love it. And it is something that I use with my own one-on-one clients. But I think some practitioners, some people in the nutrition and fitness industry, you know, they can see this intuitive eating, this it's really not new. It's just the way that we were all designed to eat, but now it's again repackaged in a book and a podcast and all the things that can be revolutionary to people who have grown up in diet culture for a really long time. But I work with a lot of women who are still really either deep in the trenches of their eating disorder or they're kind of in this like quasi recovery space. They're doing some of the work, but they're not really doing the deep work that they need to be doing. And one thing that I hear a lot in the intuitive eating space is you need to give yourself permission to eat all foods unconditionally, which I agree with. You need to give yourself permission to eat whatever you want. And sometimes you even need to give yourself permission to binge, which again, for the right person can be true because you think about food specifically, the more that we restrict something, the more that we want it. It's like when you're a little
Yeah.
kid and the mom says like don't press that button and immediately like the kid presses the button. Like of course we're going to do it. It's psychologically adults are no different, right? But I have this one client and when she first started working with a registered dietitian for her eating disorder recovery, that's what the dietitian told her to do. Unconditionally permission to eat all foods, eat whatever you want all the time. And it just made her eating disorder worse. She had no guidance. She had really no support. She had no understanding of like why she was doing this in the first place. But she thought that in order to heal her relationship with food, oh, okay, I just have to give myself permission to eat. And again, sometimes that can work because if you give yourself permission to eat an entire box of Oreos every single night, by day 3, you're going to be really sick of Oreos. And I'm speaking from experience, right? But for other people, it just sends them down a deeper rabbit hole, right? And so, all of that to say that even in this space, everybody is their own unique individual. And while, again, I do agree with a lot of the principles of intuitive eating, it's not a one size fits all. And you have to be willing to be flexible in your approach because it is a really touchy and a really personal subject. And it's so deeply rooted in trauma and personal experiences and self-awareness or lack thereof. And it's so complicated. So you always have to be willing to hold space for that.
I love that. I love that. It's like when you make something the enemy, right? Oftentimes it's just at the forefront of our mind. And like the child, the monkey brain, the rebel in us just wants to indulge in it more. And so I kind of see that sometimes, maybe not the best example, but with my phone, right? Like I try to put my phone down every night. And then when I put it down, I put it on the counter, I'm like, don't touch it. Every time I get up, all I'm thinking about is touching it because I'm just making it the enemy. I'm like,
Yeah.
what if I just kept it near me and just like, didn't villainize it, but just realize that just right now I'm just don't need to be on it. And so again, maybe not the best example, but I love that feedback where it's like, don't make the things that you're trying to overcome the enemy and villainize them. Instead, just grow neutral to them,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? And
100%.
so I love that. I love that. I think I just, that's why I think you and I get along because I think the same way, well, for many reasons, but the same way that you approach your work, your clientele, food, nutrition, workouts, right? It's just the same way, that I approach finances, where it's just like, yeah, we can put some parameters and some boundaries and some systems in place, but if we really want to get some long-term results, let's get to the root problem, what's really going on here, right? And if you solve that, then, you basically solve for the long term. And so, uh, you've already given so many gems, so I'm going to keep this going though. And so, if you only had a few sentences to give the audience, what would you tell them is the most important thing they should know about their food and relationship with it?
The most important thing that the audience needs to know about their food and the relationship with it. I
And it's
think
tough.
I think that your relationship with food is a manifestation of the relationship that you have with yourself.
Ooh, ooh, dig into that a little bit more because that I hear where you're going.
Your relationship with food is the manifestation of the relationship that you have with yourself. And I also think that how you feel about food will probably do more harm than good than the food itself. I think that's another common misconception that I see in the nutrition and wellness industry because I think that when you, especially if you grow up in an environment that maybe feels really toxic or feels really out of control, or the dynamic is just not healthy, whatever that means for you, your nervous system from a really young age gets so used to chaos. And again, especially when we're really little, we don't really have any control. You think about you're a parent, right? You have to provide for your baby. They really can't rely on themselves or the world around them. They rely on you. And if you're a child who feels like they can't rely on their parents, or, you're little, you don't have any tools or awareness to kind of process the things that are happening around you, more often than not, we turn to the only thing that we feel we do have control over, which is our body, right?
Mm.
It's really the only thing that we're given true autonomy over sometimes. And at least for me in my journey, I think that was why my unhealthy coping mechanisms or addiction manifested as an eating disorder or manifested as a negative relationship with food at first, because I felt like my whole life was, again, I felt like I was living for somebody else. I wasn't living for myself. I wasn't given a lot of choices. I wasn't given a lot of autonomy. I felt like my whole upbringing was very chaotic. And so the only way that I knew how to cope was with food or controlling food and controlling my body. And again, especially just, I think men and women, truly, we're just predisposed because of
Yeah.
society, the media, celebrities, etc., to have this negative perception of our body or to praise whatever body trend is in right now because it changes every 3 months. Because we think that if we just buy these products or have this figure, have this fashion or whatever, this surgery, that we're going to look better and we're going to feel better and then we're going to make more money and we're going to like all of these things. And it's just a complete lie. It's an entire industry, right? It's an entire industry. And I think that if I grew up in a little bit of a more safe and secure environment, not that my parents didn't do an amazing job and I love them very, very much, but if I learned how to develop that secure relationship with myself and secure relationship with the other people around me, I wouldn't need to succumb to that diet culture. I wouldn't feel
Yeah.
the need to change my body and do all of these different things and try to please people by fitting in. I would have felt more confident to just be myself and stand out and be authentic and vibrant and weird and not feel any type of way about it. Right.
Mhm.
And that just wasn't my reality. So I think that's what I mean when I say that your relationship with food is just a manifestation of your relationship with yourself. I wasn't fostering the relationship with myself. I was too concerned with the relationships that I had with others. I was too concerned with how good my resume looked. I wasn't
Mm.
doing any kind of that inner work.
There's always one thing, at least one thing that I hear on every one of my shows that I think was more for me than anybody else. And I think that was the gem there.
Oh,
And it reminds me of the quote that it'll never be enough until you're enough.
yeah,
Like it's just gonna be like it's gonna be the next diet. It's gonna be the next aesthetic enhancement, right? It's gonna be the next this, or what people will say the goalpost just keeps moving,
yeah,
right? And we're looking for something in the external world that can only be solved for and provided in our internal world. And
exactly.
so, so good, so good. And so, I just want to encourage people that are listening to this. I know this is a touchy topic. I know it's kind of like money, and sometimes it could be a little taboo. It can be a little scary. You can feel like you're going to be judged by people, right? And ultimately, it really is up to you to decide if you're safe with somebody or not. But if I could vouch for Alex on this topic and what she does, right? You working with her and letting her help you with this topic past this podcast. From my perspective, you're as safe as you possibly can be, right? Again, it's ultimately up for you to decide safety. But if this is hitting home for you or somebody I just encourage you to step forward towards Alex, because I love the quote that says, the more that we talk about darkness in safe spaces, the less control it has over us. Right. And
Mm,
so I know Alex has provided that safe, and not just safe, but beneficial and effective and progressive container for her clients when it comes to this topic and more. And so, Alex, if somebody's feeling that pull, where can they find you and connect?
Thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate that. And
Of course.
truly, I will never judge anybody ever. I've
Yeah.
done it all. I've really, I've done it all. I've seen it all. I've been it all. And that's why I love this work so much because I see so much of myself in all of my clients, even if they don't necessarily have an active eating disorder per se. I think to a degree, we can all relate to the body image issues and the feeling like, I'm doing all of the right things and I'm like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but it's still not enough and I'm still unhappy and I'm still striving for more, 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 or I feel guilty when I just want to relax on a Sunday because I feel like I need to, be more productive. And it's like, okay, well, where does that come from? And believe it or not, that limiting belief is also related to your relationship with food, right? But anyway, all of that to say, you can find me on Instagram, alex.undefined. I would love to chat with you. I also have my own podcast, which we can probably link it in the show notes, where I talk about all of this stuff and more. And it's called Overcoming Our Identity. And Justin was also a guest on it. He was amazing. So go check that out too.
I love that. And so everybody go follow Alex, go message her, tell her I sent you, and you can thank me later. But one thing I didn't want to go back to before we closed. I took a note of it while you were talking. And you had mentioned how it was just kind of ironic that you were in school to be a dietitian while struggling with an eating disorder. And, then you kind of said something, towards the end here where like, I'll never judge because I've kind of been through it all and I've done it all. And I think that's what makes you most special, right? Because you would be a good coach. You would be a good leader of, nutrition for your clients based off of your successes, right? But why you're extraordinary, right, is because of the tension that you went through, the mistakes that you've made, the hardships that you faced, right? Because when you have depth, right, and depth allows you to relate to people, it allows you to hold space, it allows you to empathize, sympathize, be sensitive to what they're going through, right? And the only way that you acquire such depth is through hardship, right? And so our tension molds us, right? I always say God gives us our mountains as medicine, right? And so I just wanted to point that out to go back to that. Like, yeah, it's maybe a little ironic, but at the same time, it was actually what was supposed to happen.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I always try to be really honest and vulnerable, not just on social media, but with my own clients too. Even though I have overcome a lot and I have learned a lot, I'm still in it. I am still in it. I feel like I'm just getting started on my own personal healing journey and I'm still making mistakes. I'm still learning. I'm still growing. And so I never want anybody to look at me and think that I have it all figured out because I think anybody who tells you that they have it all figured out is lying.
so true. And you don't want people to have it all figured out, and or you don't want people to lead you on something that has never been through hardship with it. And so anyways, I wanted to end there. But again, Alex, thank you so much for coming into the show. I know this is going to serve so well, and I just can't wait for the audience to hear this.
Thank you, Justin. This was awesome.
Of course. And thank you everyone for coming to another episode of the Holistic Hustle podcast. As always, subscribe, share, download, whatever your call to action that you have available to you, please do that. And this would be one of those messages that, like, if you know somebody that this would benefit, please share it with them, right? Please share it with them, pass it along, and we would be extremely honored. And so thank you all again, and we'll see you on the next episode.